You're listening to the Meditation and Attachment Podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. It is Thursday, August 19th, 2021 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. This is Meditation and Attachment, Deepening Your Practice. And we've been talking about the Brahma Viharas for the last couple of weeks. Tonight, I thought I would focus on mudita practice or sympathetic joy practice. We do tend to look at it from an attachment point of view. But just to touch into it, the Brahma Viharas, or the divine abodes, are a group of skills that you develop. We might call that the intentional development of positivity. Each one is designed for particular negative effects. The four in the Theravada way of looking at it is metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha, or loving kindness practice, compassion practice, sympathetic joy practice, and equanimity practice. The far enemy of loving kindness practice is anger or hatred. The far enemy of compassion practice is cruelty. The far enemy of sympathetic joy practice is envy and jealousy, envy around material or social position, jealousy around interpersonal relationships, and equanimity is craving, aversion, and unconsciousness. The near enemy is a little bit different. The near enemy is the thing that it's easy to mistake the actual activity of the abode for the near enemy of it. In loving kindness practice, the near enemy is sentimentality. The main difference between loving kindness is the centering of the experience in the present moment and holding the mind state of loving kindness. Sentimentality is generally generated by thinking, and so you slip out of the experience of the present moment into a thought process that generates an emotional state. So in some sense, it's a kind of self-generated emotion where you've slipped out of the experience of the present moment into the thought process itself. Compassion practice, the near enemy is sympathy. Compassion is a empathetic practice, which means that you're actually engaged in the activity of empathy, which means an exchanging of your feeling states with somebody else. And sympathy is an internal process that doesn't require an empathetic experience. And so that's the main difference. You slip out of the present moment and out of the empathetic experience into a generated experience, again, a thinking process, which is the near enemy. In a sympathetic joy practice, you're attempting to generate a mind state where you're celebratory or joyful around other people succeeding in the things that they want to do. We might, from an attachment point of view, call that the function of expressed delight in somebody else and things that they're doing for themselves. The near enemy then is to root for somebody because you get a direct benefit from it. The example that is often given is that you root for a particular sports team to win because you get a kick out of your team winning, but it can be lots of different things. You root for somebody to do well because you can use their position to develop or enhance your own position. And in equanimity, the near enemy is indifference. So equanimity is an active state where you're in balance, and indifferent means that you're disengaged. So I like to teach this as a jhana or high concentration practice, so that what we're really looking for is a way to cause a particular mind state to arise or a view to arise, maintain that view, and use it as an object of concentration. The reason that I like to do that is because it helps develop the capacity for, in some sense, mentalizing. When we look at this from an attachment perspective, what we see is that this mentalizing skill is a way of understanding what your experience is, and making sense out of it. One of the things we're always talking about in meditation is to really take in the experience clearly and then represent it in a way that's accurate in terms of what's actually happening. And to mentalize well is to be able to do that. And to not mentalize well means that your capacity to recognize your own experiences and reactions and how that changes the way that you create the experience of self and world isn't as available to you, so that the distortions that can arise in the forming of conceptual reality from ultimate reality go undetected, and then that creates intentions which are not accurate, which lead to actions which lead to karmic traces. We're looking for a way out of generating unskillful actions, and then having to deal with less than fortunate karmic outcomes from that. One of the things that we talk about in terms of attachment in people that just have the capacity to do that is that they had the experience of their caregivers reflecting about their experience, particularly early when it's pre-verbal. Can you imagine crawling around in diapers and your caregivers being with you and speculating between themselves what was actually going on with you, and then inquiring of you what was actually going on? And in that early experience before language was born, where it's simply recognizing the way that they're looking at you and describing it, even though they might be using words you don't really assign meaning to them. The activity of somebody else wondering about what your internal states were, and engaging you in a conversation, but also engaging somebody else in that, so that you see as an infant that people are interested in what's actually happening with you. They're interested in what your internal experience is, and how that might be different as an experience and a sense of value from childhood experiences where that actually didn't happen, or they weren't interested, or they couldn't understand what was happening. And so that activity for people who tend to be securely functioning is the thing that teaches them that capacity to be self-reflective in that way. So understanding what a mind state or a view is, the view operates, or the mind state operates in between ultimate reality and conceptual reality. And then understanding that you can affect that view, and that it changes the way ultimate reality is made into conceptual reality. And that you have the capacity to change it in a beneficial way or an afflictive way is really the heart of what these practices in developing the capacity for positivity are about. equanimity, of course, is a mind state of balance. And so you have the conversion of ultimate reality, the pure sensing experience, into conceptual reality, and it creates a kind of neutral picture, so that the reflection of the sensing experiences, touching, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and mind, are made into an internal representation of that then is projected outward. And then on top of that, you can layer in positivities or positive states. So seeing clearly what is there, and then inclining the mind, say, toward loving kindness or compassion or this joyfulness. Is that all making sense so far? Christian?
I'm curious about sort of your personal practice when you're going about your day. Are you like, do you have like a systemized way, I guess not when you're meditating, of like, I'm going to stay in meta mind, or I'm going to cycle through these different mind states, or I'm going to stay in equanimity? Or do you kind of use them really contextually for whatever's in the moment and what's coming up? Or I don't know if my question makes sense or it's too broad.
Well, it is a vast question. And so I will try to break it into pieces so I can answer it. One aspect of this would be where I started and where I am now. So in the beginning, I had to be relentless in training the mind out of generating constant negative states. Mainly the way that I regulated emotion was by generating anger. Anger, fear of sadness were the big strategies I had for regulating emotion, and mainly anger was the one that I used. So I was constantly in a state of anger. And to train myself out of that took a lot of effort and a doggedness to get that to shift. But if you look at where my mind is now, it doesn't do that anymore because I've trained it out of that. So in the beginning, the capacity for positivity was really limited, and it took a lot of effort to shift that. But now that it's been shifted, I don't have to do that kind of relentless practice anymore in that way. I did systematically, I tend to like systems and practice in a systematic way, go through the whole series of them, kind of like the way that I teach them. Practicing loving kindness, then practicing compassion, then practicing joy, then practicing balance. And now mainly what I am able to do is monitor the mind states that I'm in, monitor the strategies for emotional regulation. And if I notice that the mind is inclining toward an afflictive strategy, I suppress it and replace it. And the easiest for me is just to do the simple meta phrase, may I be peaceful, or may you be peaceful.
So does that mean that you sort of value spontaneity in your mind states unless they really get derailed, in which case you use the practice to bring you back, and then you kind of let whatever mind state would unfold?
Well, what I'm mainly working on in my own practice is stabilizing awakened awareness, so that that's the mind state that's just there all of the time. So longer and longer periods, awakened awareness is the main mind state that I operate through. And then sometimes things happen which knock me off balance, and I notice that my mind is engaged in an afflictive self-generated emotion strategy to regulate the experience of the present moment. And you're in that place that if you can come into the experience of the present moment and discover what's actually happening, and then you can quantize the experience that's exceeded the window of tolerance, so that the mind needs to actively be engaged in emotional regulation, then you can drop out of the or drop back into the window of tolerance, and then attempt to hold the mind state of awakened awareness. If you can't do that, then you have to deal with the afflictive strategies if they're present and address them in a different way, which I tend to use metaphrases as a way of dealing with the residual afflictive emotional regulation strategies that I have. It isn't that you come to a place where you don't have the experiences and reactions to the present moment. It's that you're able to manage them in a way that's more skillful than maybe what you came up with. We mainly know the strategies that our family systems used, and my family system was not really that skillful. I mean, really, if you look at it, the main way of regulating in the family system I grew up in was drinking too much. That is not actually what I consider the most skillful strategy. We did have other skills like humor and sort of thinking of my grandmother on my mother's side. She could be very kind and very tender, but she could also be easily offended and harsh. And she had sort of rigid ideas of sex roles and what was manly and what wasn't. And if you were in some sense too vulnerable, and you were a man, she would set you straight as to what was manly and what wasn't. And my family was, homophobic, and one of the main corrections I experienced as a child was that I was too effeminate. And so I was constantly being corrected around gender presentation. And it was bewildering because I couldn't tell the difference between the gestures, since I was using gestures that were assigned, but not in maybe a convincing way, or who knows what, right? What that was. Since it wasn't coming from me, I was just trying to be in the world, and I was being constantly corrected for how that presentation made the family look. It wasn't even about me particularly, but about the presentation of our family and our family's achievement and our place in the world. And mainly what I got from it was that people were unhappy. So in some sense, what I'm describing is different than that. I think that you should be happy. I think that you should pursue things that mean something to you. And I think that you should do that even if they're not things that are valued by our culture particularly. There isn't a kind of even spread of resources assigned to activities in our culture, particularly in America. It's a little bit less like that in European society, where all sorts of activities fall within a range of a living wage, let's put it. That isn't true in our country at all. So, in fact, we've suppressed the living wage to the point where we don't really have one anymore, and for a lot of people. And we have, just, I like to call it the vacuum up theory of economics, where all of the money is just siphoned up into the top of the game, and then because of the inheritance laws, is passed on generation after generation, and so it just consolidates the wealth in these increasingly small populations, which is an effect of our government system. That if the tax code were different, it wouldn't be possible to do that, and the money would be more evenly distributed, and people's lives would be different in the sense that you could make a way to be in the world that then also left you with time, energy, and resources to actually pursue things that have meaning. It is, in some sense, the way our society is organized, harder to do that than it might be, because so much of the time is just spent in producing what you need to survive in the world. The four basics: food, shelter, clothing, and medicine. So when you reflect on this through the attachment lens, some attachment systems, some family attachment systems that you grow up in intentionally develop joyfulness, and some don't. We would call it in the attachment world expressed delight. So some attachment systems have it and some don't. If you look at secure functioning people, expressed delight is one of the currencies of their relationship, and it's really an act of generosity that people in that system use, and so it's ordinary. This is something to really understand, because in some systems there's expressed delight, but it's so unusual it takes on an extraordinary value, whereas in secure functioning systems, expressed delight or joyfulness is really ordinary, like water or air. Imagine growing up in an environment where people expressed a delight in the way that you are, without having to do anything, just your beingness, and that's an ordinary experience for you, so that you just move around and people are constantly expressing their delight in the way that you are. If you grow up to be dismissing, then there is the experience of delight or joyfulness, but it's tied to performance, and it's tied to negotiating or transacting care. So it's a trade. It isn't free in that sense. I delight in you because you do something for me. It's very different than it just being common. People who grow up to be preoccupied don't really know delight, because it's never expressed in their childhood. It's not a currency that is operable. Preoccupied people operate on helplessness. That is to say, they attempt to convince you that they're helpless and that you need to help them solve ordinary problems. When you're smart about this, what you figure out is that if you present somebody with a solvable problem and they solve it, the need for proximity vanishes. And so it's better to identify unsolvable problems and present those. What is your experience of being delighted by somebody who every time you see them presents you with a problem that you can't solve? Probably pretty low, right? Oh no, another problem I can't do anything about.
People really like puzzles, George.
People really like solving puzzles.
Have you ever solved like one of those 5,000 piece puzzles?
Certainly.
Okay.
In fact, I have a friend who likes to go to the countryside and spend a week there, and usually the first night she'll dump one of those 5,000 piece puzzles on a table, and then all during the week everybody who's in the house goes through the process of solving the puzzle, and usually sort of halfway through it, all the pieces get placed.
Maybe she should become a consultant for the anxiously preoccupied then.
Uh-huh. My favorite is when somebody in some kind of delight uh, withholds a piece. So there's 4,999 pieces, and there's one opening, and then everybody's scrambling to find the missing piece. Disorganized people relate to delight differently. In some sense, it's an extraordinary thing. Kindness for them is an extraordinary thing. An expression of delight in them is an extraordinary thing. And so it's valuable. And the disadvantage in that is that what is really ordinary for some people is extraordinarily valuable for this group. And so they're manipulatable or exploitable because of that. And then often that is used against them. And so they have the experience of delight being extraordinarily rare, but most often used as a way of harming them. So it creates a real paradox around that. You're kind to somebody who's disorganized, and they're almost weeping from it, even though the gesture is ordinary and would be hardly remarkable in a secure system. And then the desire for that leads them to compromise, often in a way that a secure person would never consider. And particularly when it's used in that way with children, they're very exploitable. So this practice, where we're intentionally developing joyfulness, is very useful for this, because if you don't have that experience of easy joyfulness, of easy delight, this practice will begin to train you into the capacity of it. It is a necessary component of your skill set in order to move into secure functioning. And so I really like the idea of this intentional focus on that joyfulness. And it really is this capacity to be joyful in somebody doing well, whether you benefit from it or not, the currency of that. So they don't even have to do well, really, is what I'm saying. Just their beingness, just the way that they are, this capacity to delight in them is really valuable and useful if you don't have the skill for doing it. In fact, it's one of the pieces that you need to be able to move from insecure to secure functioning. The training of it is finding that view, right, that holds the world in that way, that's that you find that sense of delight, that sense of joyfulness, and then maintaining it in your exchanges with other people, viewing them through that filter, and which is the thing that begins to generate in you the spontaneous evocation of it. And so imagine this. You know somebody, and each time you walk up to them, as soon as they see you, there's a spontaneous evocation of delight in seeing you. How does that make you feel? And what does your reaction tend to be? You tend to delight in that, and then that expresses a kind of exchange of delight. To explore and to find meaning and to do it in a way that enriches your life is often hard and effortful, and it takes a lot of doing to get there, and it takes a lot of risk to get there, and you can be knocked sideways emotionally, and you can need to rush back to your secure base for help. And if you rush back to your secure base and their response is simply to light up with delight in seeing you, even though you're completely knocked sideways and need help, and they just light up with delight in seeing you and immediately begin to help you, this becomes that basis of which you really become more and more willing to risk the finding of meaning. Whereas if you come rushing back and they're startled by how beat up you are, and they don't want to have to take from their own interest time, energy, and resources to help you, how does that make you feel? The difference is quite, I think, stark. Usually what happens when you don't have people around you that can provide that for you is you begin to limit your exploration because it's too difficult to be dysregulated and abide the exploration. So another thing to really identify is people who just think that you're awesome and light up with that. And then value those people and gather them around you so you have that support that you need. And all you have to do to get it from them is to collaborate in doing it for them. So it's a kind of mutual collaborative experience of being together. Is that all making sense? So we do always practice first for the easy person. The Sayadaw, this way of practicing is from Sayadaw Indica. Easy person in the traditional categories would be teachers, mentors, or benefactors. He noticed that in teaching Western students that teachers, mentors, and benefactors are not highly valued. So they don't produce an easy experience of that. And so he renamed it easy, because that's what it's supposed to be. That's the category that it's supposed to be. That when you think of them, the mind naturally inclines toward that. And the relationships are simple, so that not a lot else is in that working model. So who do you have that you just feel joyful for? And then you begin to practice for self. One of the things about generating positivity and the experience of positivity and how that undoes self-hatred or self-loathing is that when you use primarily negative states to regulate your experience, you build these working models of the self that have all of these negative states associated with them. And so you have the activation of self, which happens just ordinarily in the experience of the world. But if it's packed with negative states, each time the self activates, these negative states activate, and you can begin to develop an aversion to the experience of the self arising. And then really the only way that you can prevent constant activations of self is to withdraw from stimulus. And so a lot of people who have a lot of aversive responses to the way that the working model of self is constructed is to do less and less and be stimulated less and less so that they don't have to have the constant negative state of self. And so this approach is really to intentionally embed in the working model of self these highly positive states. So you want to practice for the self a lot, so much so that when the sense of self activates, it's a pleasant, positive experience rather than a negative experience. So I'd like to say, if when the sense of self activates, if it's not a pleasant experience, then half of your practice should be embedding positive states into the self experience so that you just have that same sense of expressed delight when when the activity of self arises. I know from my own experience, using anger primarily as the way of regulating emotion, that the self-experience was extremely unpleasant to deal with, because every time it arose, I would be in a state of anger. Anger is exhausting. I don't know if you've parsed that enough to know, but the chemicals that need to be dumped into the system to generate the experience of anger deplete the body. They deplete, the liver, the kidneys, everything that has to come into play to make that happen, and then also to clean it out of the system once it's built. So any questions about this before we begin a period of practice? Okay. So go ahead and take your meditation posture. So any comments or questions about the practice we just did? Christian?
I feel like, and this seems to happen with loving kindness as well. I can get a really intense mind state, but it seems very strained at the same time. Like I'm always kind of inflating it the whole time, and I'm trying to kind of find, because I'll try and relax it a little bit, but then sometimes it seems like the mind state itself dims. So there's kind of the physical component. It's like I feel like, like I must have a smile or something, like muscles. I don't know if you have any tips for trying to find the relaxation within that without losing the mind state, or if it's just kind of you just keep trying until you do it.
Maybe zoom in more, so that you in some sense you allow the mind state to expand and fill up awareness completely, and everything else drifts into the background, so that it becomes the sole object and the mind isn't distracted by the other ones so much, and you then settle in. In the first jhana, you're efforting. That's one of the reasons why it's unstable. And then what you'll notice is that as you allow the mindset, it becomes the complete experience of the present moment. You just settle into it. And it's in that settling into the second one that you don't have to effort anymore. But it's not so much relaxing as zooming in.
And that's zooming into the physical sensation, or zooming further into?
Yeah, you could go into the physical sensation or into the view, the mind state.
Does that produce a different experience, or does that kind of both get you to the same place?
Well, the experience fills up everything, so that everything else drifts further and further into the background, so they're not distracting.
Because I don't seem to have a problem with distraction. It just seems strained, like it's
Right.
ever present, but it's strained.
There's an effort.
Like just physically, it just like, I don't know, it just seems so maybe I have to think about this a little bit more in order to describe it, but
some of it, the sense is that you drop. So maybe that would be something to do. You drop out of the effort just into the mind state. But what I notice when it happens is that everything that could be distracting, that I need to hold the attention away from, falls out of awareness, and only the mind state is left.
okay.
Someone else? So thank you for coming, and thank you for your practice. We have a level 2 class, which is starting in September. We've added a link for Donna, if you want to participate in the class, I know it wasn't working, but it's been repaired, so it is now. If you want to do that, there's one spot left with sessions, and all of the other spots are without sessions. So if you're interested in having the additional support of sessions, there's just the one space left. I think that we have a retreat, an in-person retreat in December, and there are 8 spaces left in that, if you're interested in that. We are going to do another level 2 in, I think, level 1 in November, December. So 3 classes in the level 1. That should also be up on the website soon if it isn't already. Saturday is the meditation and attachment for relationships. So it's a day long around collaborative relationship skills. So come to that if you'd like. What else? I think that's about it. Anyway, all of that stuff is up on the website. Take a look. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that you'll support us by making a donation. It helps pay my living expenses and also supports the work that Mettagroup is doing. There's a link on the website, or if you got an email from us, there's probably one in there as well. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon somewhere on the path. Bye now.